For what I'm about to show you, I want you to cross your fingers and hope for the best. Got it? Okay. This recent video from climate change expert Simon Clarke might be doing something extremely important. At the time of this recording, he's gotten 174,000 people to learn about contrails and climate change. This is not chemtrails, the baseless conspiracy theory. It's contrails, or condensation trails, the clouds made by airplanes. They're not made out of nefarious chemicals, they're made out of water vapor frozen into tiny ice crystals. Water vapor is a greenhouse gas, trapping heat at the surface, and contrails do contribute to global warming. Though technically, because it's ice crystals, it should be called a greenhouse solid instead of a greenhouse gas, but no one ever says that. The reason why Simon's video might be so important is because some people say that contrails could be a cheap and easy solution to a big chunk of climate change, and it's limited by a lack of public awareness. It flies under the radar. Thanks to Simon's video, we now have a lot more public awareness. That includes me. I have a PhD in climate change policy, and I didn't know about contrails until I saw Simon's video. Simon has a PhD in climate change science, and in his video, he says he didn't know about it until he saw it in a blog post that was published a few months earlier. My friends, welcome to Manhattan. Okay, it feels a little strange doing a video about global warming on a beautiful snow day like today, but this is one of the many things that global warming is threatening, and one of the things that we're fighting for. Plus, cold weather, blue sky, it's actually a perfect day to go contrail hunting. I think I saw some walking over here. We'll see if we can catch one on the film. In total, contrails cause about 1 or 2% of global warming, which might not sound like much, but that's comparable to the entire emissions of a big country like Japan or Germany or Mexico. For that much of climate change to have a cheap and easy solution, yet hardly anyone knows about it, even experts like Simon and me, it may well be the world's most underrated climate solution. If you're hearing some background noise, that's actually airplane noise pollution. In environmental politics, two big challenges are the concern that protecting the environment makes things more expensive, like having a carbon tax on burning fossil fuels. This was a big factor in the recent European farmers' protests. The other is the concern that protecting the environment makes things unpleasant for us, like asking people to drive when they don't want to, or when they live in a place that doesn't have good transit. Those concerns are not always correct, but sometimes they are. And either way, it's really important that we latch on to solutions that are cheap and easy when we have them. For contrails to maybe have a cheap and easy solution for 1 or 2% of global warming, and all we need is more awareness, that's a really big deal. But, oh, I really wish there wasn't a but there is. Avoiding contrails might be cheap, but it might not be so easy, at least not at the scale we'd need to avoid 1 or 2% of global warming. And this brings us to my one big criticism of Simon's video. First though, let me say that while I do have some criticisms, overall I think it's a very good video, and Simon's a really great top-tier creator. You should watch his video and subscribe to his channel. Furthermore, this same criticism applies to things that some contrails experts say. It would have been great if Simon's video had addressed this, but it didn't, so now we have my video. And my video has its own limitations, which you'll see at the end. What this all means is that while I do have some criticisms, I'm not making this video to tear Simon down. I'm making it to build on his work to advance the conversation about contrails. With that in mind, let's take a look at it. In his video, Simon says,
but fortunately, there is a way to halve the climate impact of any flights that you do take.
Notice that he said there is a way, not there might be a way. An important detail. He said to halve or cut in half the climate impact. Contrails are only half the climate impact of aviation. The other half is carbon dioxide emissions from burning fuel. Avoiding contrails doesn't solve the CO2 part, so it's always better to not fly in the first place. Later in the video, Simon says,
just stop planes forming contrails. If only if it was that easy. Well, actually...
Here the video is really suggesting that it would be easy to avoid contrails. And then, toward the end, Simon says...
Frankly, I think the big reason airlines haven't wholesale adopted this yet is because the public doesn't know this is an option.
This makes it sound like we could really solve the contrails problem if only there was more public attention and pressure on the airlines. However, elsewhere in the video, Simon says,
arguably the biggest challenge at this point is making this easy and safe for airlines.
That's a very different type of challenge. It's not about public awareness and putting pressure on the airlines. It's about the technical feasibility of actually avoiding contrails. So which is it? Is progress limited by our ability to avoid contrails or our motivation to do it? It feels like Simon puts more emphasis on motivation, but I can't tell. Unfortunately, contrails experts are also not clear on this. Some of them say it's easy, like the European Federation for Transport and Environment, or here, Safe Landing, which looks like a great group of aviation professionals who care about the environment. And then other experts say it's difficult, like this guy, Dennis Vida, cool shades. He says the contrail field is very data-starved, which is not good for forecasting. Or this guy, Mark Shapiro, he says uncertainty is the biggest problem with this field. On the contrails.org website, it says, precise contrail forecasting is a really challenging science problem, but also, the significant impact of contrails on climate is still a secret to many people. For a change to happen, the issue needs to be known. We have here two ideas that can't both be true. Either avoiding contrails is cheap and easy, or it's difficult and plagued with uncertainty. If it is cheap and easy, then maybe we really do just need more public awareness and we can really solve this problem. Alternatively, if it's difficult, then we need to focus on the science and logistics of avoiding contrails. So again, which is it? Let's start with the idea that avoiding contrails could be easy. The key detail is that it takes very specific atmospheric conditions for contrails to form, and those conditions are not very common. Because of that, as you may have noticed, many flights do not form contrails. Furthermore, some contrails aren't a problem for some subtle scientific reasons that Simon Clark explains in his video. So we only need to worry about a portion of flights. One recent study found that just 2% of flights cause 80% of contrail warming. On top of that, those regions of the atmosphere where contrails form, they have a very particular shape. As Simon says,
and while these parts of the sky can be hundreds of kilometers across, they're generally less than a kilometer deep vertically.
What that means is we can avoid contrails just by shifting airplane flight paths up or down in the sky a little bit. A small shift in flight paths for a small portion of flights, all to avoid a large portion of global warming. The cost is not zero, but it is very small, and it would also only be a small inconvenience to travelers, just a few minutes on a multi-hour flight, which is basically nothing, especially compared to everything else that can go wrong on a plane trip. And we already monitor atmospheric conditions and adjust flight paths to avoid turbulence. Avoiding contrails is fundamentally similar. This genuinely makes it seem like it could be cheap and easy, but there are two problems. One is the scientific uncertainty in forecasting which regions of the atmosphere will have the conditions where harmful contrails can form. Ideally, we would have the forecasts before the initial flight path is set, but at a minimum, we need it during the flight far enough in advance for the pilot to change course. However, as contrails.org says, precise contrail forecasting is a really challenging science problem. The second problem is the logistics of implementing flight path changes across all of the relevant flights. The EU probably has the world's best contrails program, run by their air traffic control agency, Eurocontrol. This past summer, Eurocontrol paused its contrails program. Summer is Europe's peak travel season, and with all those planes in the air, Eurocontrol couldn't keep up with the logistics, and everyone else in the world is probably worse at this than them. Remember, Simon says,
but fortunately, there is a way to halve the climate impact of any flights that you do take.
Right now, it sure looks like that's not true. In principle, yes, but in practice, no. Fingers crossed, I hope we can do this. I hope we are at least close to having a cheap and easy solution to an amount of global warming comparable to the entire emissions of Japan or Germany or Mexico. And maybe public pressure could help with that. In fact, when Simon says,
frankly, I think the big reason airlines haven't wholesale adopted this yet is because the public doesn't know this is an option.
maybe the word "this" just means programs to get better at avoiding contrails and not programs to avoid all of them. And that checks out. Even if we can't yet solve the entire problem, we can certainly work to make progress on it, and public pressure could push us to try harder. This brings us to a smaller criticism I have of Simon's video. Simon says,
the next time that you fly, make sure your airline knows that you know they could be doing. Send them an email, something like, hello.
It's not obvious to me that the best way for members of the public to help out on contrails is to interact with the customer service divisions of some large corporations. Now, in fairness, that was just a quick anecdote in Simon's video, not a major theme. But still, if we are going to ask the public to do something, we should try to be thoughtful about what it is we're asking them to do. For example, I would suggest people contact their local environmental organizations, politicians, and other people who already care about climate change but might not know about contrails. These people are motivated to act, and they could get even more people involved. Have them watch Simon's video, and this one if it turns out any good. Now I want to show you this map. This shows the flights where harmful contrails form. As you can see, the bulk of it is in Europe, North America, and the North Atlantic. This shows us which regions we need to focus our contrails efforts on. The EU is already active, but they could probably do more, and we need to get the other countries involved. The UK, Canada, the US, ideally even Russia, though that's of course a tougher challenge. Even the US is difficult right now, with the current government being, shall we say, less aggressive on environmental protection. A quick disclaimer. I work in a nonpartisan capacity. I do not endorse any politicians or political parties. There definitely is a role for policy advocacy in the US. Maybe we could pull off a national policy despite the current government, and we could at least set the stage for something under a future government. Also, I'm pretty sure we could do state policy for flights in which the origin and destination are both within the same state. That's under the Commerce Clause of the US Constitution. Remember the politics of environmental protection and how important it is that avoiding contrails may be cheap and easy, especially at a time when so many people are concerned about the cost of living? With that in mind, I don't want to rule out what we can accomplish politically on contrails. This really has strong potential, but it would help to have some public pressure. So, to ask the question again, which is it? For avoiding contrails, are we limited by our ability to avoid them or by our motivation to actually do it? Likewise, should we focus our efforts on the science and logistics or on public awareness and pressure? Or maybe some combination of both? From all I've seen, I don't actually know. I want to say we're more limited by the science and logistics, but it is still true that there is very little awareness of this. This genuinely could be the world's most underrated climate solution. From my research for this video, I couldn't resolve this. Earlier, I said my video has some limitations. This is it. That's a nice view, right? That's the hill we were on top of. So, a next step would be to ask some contrails experts. I might do it, but right now it's the last week of December between Christmas and New Year's, and I'm not contacting anybody until normal business starts back up in the new year. And I might do it then, but I'm warning you, I work on like 100 different topics, so I might not get to this, even though this does seem like a really compelling topic, a chance to move the needle on an amount of climate change comparable to the entire emissions of Japan or Germany or Mexico. With that in mind, I've put my research notes in a blog post on my Patreon account. No paywall, just click the link in the description for anyone who wants to follow up on this. Please, I welcome you to build on this video just as I've built on Simon's. Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got to get back home.